North Korean leader Kim Jong-un and also the South Korean President Moon Jae-in have met with the border truce village of Panmunjom in the demilitarized zone between the two Koreas. Now, the two leaders also shook hands and walked the red carpet. Now, the high-profile leaders are discussing a range of issues, including North Korea's nuclear weapons program. Now, after stepping into South Korea, the North Korean leader has also signed the visitor's book with a message, "New history begins now." Now, these are the visuals that you see on your screens of the North Korean leader walking on his feet into the demilitarized zone. He's meeting with his South Korean counterpart, Moon Jae-in, and this in many ways is a historic visit by the two leaders at the demilitarized zone, and in many ways could actually usher in a new era, perhaps of peace in the Korean peninsula. Now, Kim Jong-un is, of course, the first North Korean leader to set foot in South Korea since the 1950 Korean War. Now, before the formal talks, Kim Jong-un and also Moon Jae-in had held a closed-door meeting at the Peace House. The historic meet comes following a series of back-channel talks between North and South Korean officials. The North Korean side comprises of a 9-member delegation who have accompanied Kim Jong-un, including Kim Jong-un's sister Kim Yo-jong. Now, after the official welcoming ceremony, both the nation's delegations will be meeting at the Peace House. Now, if there is an agreement after the talks, it will be announced in the evening, but no time has, of course, been set as of yet for any formal announcement. The security has also been tightened at the inter-Korea border ahead of the high-profile talks, which come in more than a decade. Now, as many as 2,800 journalists from around the world have registered at the main press center for the summit. Now, this, of course, is for the first time that the two Koreas are in fact holding talks in almost over a decade. The relations between the two nations have been extremely frosty since the 1950 Korean War. The Inter-Korea Summit is also expected to set the stage for a meeting between the United States President Donald Trump and also the North Korean leader Kim Jong-un in the coming months. Meanwhile, the White House has also issued a statement on the Inter-Korean Summit expressing hope that talks will achieve progress towards a future of peace and prosperity for the entire Korean peninsula. And also our correspondent Ramesh Ramachandran is presently tracking all the developments from the Korean peninsula for us. Well, Ramesh, this in many ways is a historic meeting of the two leaders of North and South Korea. It is for the first time that a North Korean leader has set foot on the South Korean soil. You know, how much of it is riding in terms of peace, which could be long-term after these talks?
Indeed. Good morning, Mohammed. Now, North Korea and South Korea are technically at war, and this war has been on for the last 65 years and counting. The hope in South Korea is that at least toward the end of the third Inter-Korean Summit, which began in Panmunjom just a short while ago, people here hope that towards the end of their talks, both Moon Jae-in and Kim Jong-un would have prepared a roadmap for peace and prosperity on the Korean peninsula and possibly decide to go in for a peace treaty. But that's the easiest part. The more difficult part is that any resolution of the Korean peninsula will require more than two parties. It is not a bilateral issue or dispute between the two Koreas, North and South. There are other players involved in all of this, including the US. So clearly, there's going to be a three-way talks between North Korea, South Korea and the US to resolve all issues bedeviling the two Koreas for the last 65 years, almost 7 decades now, including the issue of denuclearization and unification of the two Koreas, and also the issue of ending the war by agreeing to go in for a peace treaty. So all eyes are on the Inter-Korean Summit happening now in Panmunjom between Moon Jae-in and Kim Jong-un. And this will be followed by the much-anticipated big-ticket summit meeting between Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un next month or early June.
Absolutely, indeed. Now, you indeed, hit the nail on the head when you said that this is not just a bilateral issue, but perhaps a trilateral issue, because the United States also would be involved in some way. But Ramesh, considering the fact that, what Moon Jae-in has been saying at a time when it appeared that the Korean crisis was actually spiraling out of control just a few months ago, from that point to where we have reached today, Do you think the issue of denuclearization is something that will be discussed between the two Korean leaders, or is it something that will be left by South Korea for the United States to deal with directly with the North Koreans?
Not at all, Mohammed. Denuclearization is the issue for South Korea today as we speak between Moon Jae-in and Kim Jong-un. There are other issues on the table and will be discussed between the two leaders, but denuclearization is the issue for South Korea. South Korea and the US are asking North Korea to go in for a complete, verifiable and irreversible dismantlement of its nuclear weapons. Now, North Korea, for its part, sees nuclear weapons as an insurance policy for the survival of the Kim Jong-un regime, and it says it can only commit to suspend all nuclear tests and missile tests until further notice, as a confidence-building measure in the run-up to the two summits, the Inter-Korean summit happening today and the Trump-Kim meeting planned later. But that said, this is the big issue for South Korea and the US, and both expect some forward movement or incremental progress on this issue between now and the Trump-Kim meeting. Remember, Donald Trump has threatened to walk out of the Trump-Kim meeting if he feels that the Inter-Korean summit did not go to his liking, or if he thinks Kim Jong-un is not serious about peace and is only buying time. So clearly, all eyes are on the outcome declaration or document from the third Inter-Korean summit, and denuclearization will be high on the agenda of those Kim Jong-un, Moon Jae-in talks. There are other issues, but this is the big issue engaging the attention of many South Koreans today.
Absolutely. And also, Ramesh, the other interesting point that you raised was, of course, the fact that, post-1953, an armistice was called between North and South Korea. So there was a cessation of hostilities, but war was not formally called off. Now, are we expecting a sort of a declaration stating that the North and South Korean war will be officially over after this meeting between the two leaders?
That's a million-dollar question, Mohammed. Will they or won't they? We'll have to wait and watch till towards the end of the talks between Moon Jae-in and Kim Jong-un. Now, we are given to understand that there might be a joint declaration sometime later in the day, which might spell out some of those issues we have raised, Mohammed, including the issue of terminating the 65-year-long war and indicating a desire to go in for a peace treaty to formalize the 1953 armistice agreement signed way back in July of that year. So all those issues are up for discussion. We'll have to wait and watch for the final outcome from the third Inter-Korean summit. But that said, as I mentioned before, any resolution of the Korean crisis, Mohammed, will require more than two parties, which means North Korea, South Korea and the US. Remember, it was the US-led UN command, North Korea and China, which signed the armistice. So there are more than two parties to the dispute. And it remains to be seen the outcome, what the outcome is from the Kim Jong-un, Moon Jae-in talks, followed by the much important meeting, a more important meeting really, between the US and North Korea.
Absolutely, indeed. And also, Ramesh, considering the fact that you are presently in Seoul, how is this meeting between the two leaders being perceived there within Korea?
Well, if you look at the media coverage here in South Korea, Mohammed, I am standing in the media center on the outskirts of Seoul, the capital of South Korea. The meeting is taking place in Panmunjom village, not far from here, really about 60 kilometers in the demilitarized zone that divides the north and south. And if you can see behind me, there's at least a 3,000 odd journalists from all over the world assembled here who have descended on Seoul in the last week or so to cover this much important summit meeting between the two Koreas, followed by the Trump-Kim meeting. So a lot of interest among the international media here today as we speak, Mohammed. There are, as I mentioned, 3,000 odd registered journalists who are covering the summit. And this is being beamed live across multiple channels and networks all around the world, including from the venue of the summit in Panmunjom. So clearly, a lot of interest in the international media. Now, talking about the South Korean media, all eyes are on the twin issues, as I mentioned, of denuclearization and unification. Now, those two are emotional issues, but more important, immediate issue is that of denuclearization. Unification is a long-term project. It may happen tomorrow or the day after, but the sentiment in South Korea is that eventually, sometime going forward, the two Koreas will eventually merge and become one unified, undivided Korea, which was in vogue, which was a reality in the 50s.
Absolutely. And also, Ramesh, the biggest issue that a lot of people are, of course, speculating upon is that what does Kim Jong-un understand by the term denuclearization? Will he stop testing new nuclear weapons? Is that what he means by denuclearization? Or is it that North Korea is, of course, now willing to give up all the nuclear weapons that it already has in its possession? Any light in terms of how this is being perceived in terms of these talks?
That's a very important and interesting question, really, Mohammed. It's an issue of semantics, really. The understanding is different in North Korea and South Korea on the issue of denuclearization. What does it actually mean? And North Korea says, as I mentioned before, Mohammed, that it will suspend all nuclear and missile tests until further notice, in the interest of peace and prosperity in the immediate term between the two Koreas.
Right.
That said, Kim Jong-un has announced that he will suspend the Pyongyang nuclear test site, which was the site for conducting all 6 nuclear tests, including the most recent one, the 6th one in September of last year, the most powerful one to date.
Right.
He also expected to announce going forward that North Korea will not proliferate weapons technology as was the case earlier. So these are confidence-building measures. But South Korea and the US both insist that they want a complete, verifiable and irreversible dismantlement or elimination of nuclear weapons in North Korea, and that might be a tall order for North Korea to fulfill, because they see it as a weapon, as an insurance policy, as a defense, and they might not be willing to commit just yet to dismantlement. But yes, on the issue of global disarmament, Kim Jong-un has supported that, and he says he will work towards global disarmament, but not specifically about North Korean nuclear weapons.
Absolutely,
at
indeed,
least
Ramesh.
Just yet.
Absolutely. That, of course, is the big sticking point. What does Kim Jong-un understand by denuclearization? We'll have perhaps a slightly better picture by this evening. Do continue to stay on with us. Meanwhile, the world, of course, is watching the Inter-Korea Summit. It is not the first attempt by both sides at peace, but one would hope that the talks can actually end the 60 years of the ongoing conflict between the North and the South. Take a look.
In the wake of World War II, as the Cold War began, the Korean peninsula was divided along the 38th parallel. The North received Soviet backing, while the United States supported the South. In 1948, the two sides became officially known as the Democratic People's Republic of Korea in the North and the Republic of Korea in the South. The Korean War broke out on June 25, 1950, when the North's army invaded the South. Capturing Seoul within days, North Korean forces advanced to the tip of the peninsula. A UN coalition led by American troops stepped in to force the North Koreans back, pushing them as far as the Sino-Korean border. Chinese forces crossed into the north to help launch a counter-offensive. UN troops retaliated, and eventually in May 1951 the border between the two countries was fixed around the 38th parallel. In July 1953, North Korea signed a ceasefire agreement with the US, marking the end of the fighting. An estimated 2 to 4 million people died or disappeared during the conflict. No formal peace treaty has since been signed, leaving North and South Korea still technically at war.
All right, so that was a report giving us an upshot as to what has happened since the Korean War ended, or at least it did on the field of battle in the year 1953. But there was no official peace treaty that was signed. So will that happen after this historic talks today between Kim Jong-un and Moon Jae-in? That, of course, is the million-dollar question. A lot of people are, of course, speculating as to what will be the outcome of this meeting between Moon Jae-in and Kim Jong-un. And Ramesh, if I could come back to you on this big question now, considering the fact that it is not just a bilateral issue for the two Koreas to declare peace between themselves, the United States is actively involved. And also talk to us about the stakes that China has in this conflict, because the United States would like to see a denuclearized North Korea, but what are the interests of the Chinese in this conflict?
Another very interesting question, Mohammed, one that has implications for the region and the world at large. As I mentioned, there are many parties to the dispute at hand, the issue of the Korean crisis, including, as you mentioned, correctly, China. China is the proverbial elephant in the room,
right.
the big player in the region. It has very good ties with the North Korean regime. Remember, North Korea's only and most important valued trading partner is China. So China has all the economic leverages against North Korea if it wants to employ them at any time going forward. That said, China has supported the inter-Korean talks. It's also supported and welcomed the forthcoming Trump-Kim meeting as well. But that said, we've seen Kim Jong-un make an express desire to mend fences or mend ties with China, especially by deciding to visit Beijing and meet Xi Jinping in March, last month actually, when he and his wife Ri Sol-ju took that slow green train to Beijing and back to discuss the forthcoming two summits, including the one happening today in Panmunjom, the Inter-Korean Summit, and this next meeting with Donald Trump next month or in early June. So he kept China in the loop all the time. It remains to be seen how China plays its cards going forward. If you ask me, Mohammed, some people say that North Korea is the latest example of a proxy war playing out between the US and China, and North Korea, by virtue of its have close ties with North Korea, is being increasingly wooed by the US in a bid to distance itself or create a wedge between North Korea and China. To all purposes, if you ask me, Mohammed, the road to peace on the Korean Peninsula will pass through Beijing.
Absolutely, indeed. That, of course, is the big issue that will be looked at. Thank you very much indeed, Ramesh Ramachandran, for joining us from Seoul and getting us all those updates. This, of course, is a historic summit in many ways. Will North and South Korea now formally call for peace? That, of course, is the big question. And what will be the outcome of Kim Jong-un meeting Moon Jae-in in the demilitarized village of Panmunjom?